Lila wiped her hands on her apron for the third time that morning, trying to shake off the nervous tension that never seemed to leave her. The restaurant was busy, buzzing with the chatter of customers, clinking of cutlery, and the occasional shout from the kitchen. It was a grand place, one of those high-end restaurants where people came to show off their wealth and taste rather than to simply enjoy food. Lila had been working there for a few months, serving tables, carrying trays stacked high with plates of delicate pastries and sizzling dishes, but she never felt quite at home among the crystal glasses and fine china. She moved quickly from table to table, smiling politely even when her feet ached and her back complained. People treated her differently here. Some barely noticed her at all, thinking of her as just part of the furniture, someone whose job was to appear and serve. Others would glance at her, sometimes with irritation if she took too long, sometimes with amusement at her youth and quiet presence. But no one guessed the secret that Lila carried inside her heart. From the moment she was a child, she had been drawn to music. While other kids played outside, she would sit at the small keyboard her parents had bought secondhand, her fingers tracing notes she could barely read. She remembered those nights clearly, when the house was silent and everyone had gone to sleep. She would practice in the dim light of a single lamp, lost in the melodies that seemed to flow naturally from her hands. Music had been her escape, her comfort, and her secret world. No one in her town knew just how skilled she was. She played not for recognition, but because it felt like the only place she truly belonged. Now, as she carried another tray of glasses across the polished floor, she glanced at the grand piano sitting quietly in the corner of the dining area. It was beautiful, with a dark, polished surface that reflected the bright lights above. Lila had walked past it countless times, imagining what it would feel like to sit there and let her fingers dance across the keys in front of an audience. She always pushed the thought away with a small sigh. That was a dream for another life, one that seemed impossible for a simple waitress like her. The morning rush began to calm, and for a moment, Lila found herself standing near the piano, wiping down the table beside it. A group of wealthy patrons had just been seated near the piano, and she overheard one of them laughing. "I wonder if anyone here can actually play that thing," he said loudly, gesturing toward the instrument. "It's just for show, I suppose. A piano in a restaurant? Ha!" Lila froze for a moment, feeling a strange flutter of both fear and longing. She wanted nothing more than to prove that it was not just for show. But how could she? She was just a waitress. Who would listen to her here? Who would care if she played? She shook her head slightly, pushing the thought away, and moved to refill water glasses, trying to ignore the tantalizing pull of the piano. The patrons continued to joke among themselves, one of them standing and walking over to the piano. "Maybe someone from the staff can give us a little tune," he said, smirking. The restaurant manager, a tall man with a stern face, looked around nervously. He did not want trouble, but he also did not want to disappoint these important customers. His eyes landed on Lila, who had just set down a tray of empty glasses nearby. "You," he said softly but firmly, "go play." Lila's heart nearly stopped. She shook her head, backing up instinctively. I don't play in front of people," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The manager's expression hardened. "Just sit there and play something simple. You'll be fine. Just do it. Please." Lila felt a wave of panic, but also something else. Something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Excitement. Her fingers itched with the memory of keys, the songs she had learned by heart. For a moment, fear battled with desire. She wanted to refuse, to run back to the safety of the kitchen, but something inside her pushed forward. She took a deep breath and nodded, walking slowly toward the piano. The patrons looked on with amusement, some smirking, others rolling their eyes. They expected a clumsy, awkward performance at best, a little entertainment while they sipped their expensive wine. Lila sat on the bench, her hands hovering above the keys. Her palms were sweaty, and her heart raced so fast she thought it might burst from her chest. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the silence of the moment wash over her. And then she started. At first, the notes were hesitant, a little shaky, almost like someone testing the waters. But as she continued, her confidence grew. Her fingers remembered what years of secret practice had taught them. They moved fluidly, with precision and emotion, bringing to life melodies that no one in the room had expected. The chatter died down instantly. Glasses stopped clinking. Even the staff in the back of the restaurant paused, their eyes wide. Something magical began to happen. The wealthy patrons, who had been laughing just moments ago, now sat stunned. Their amusement faded into awe as the music filled the room. It was as if the piano was telling a story, and everyone present was caught in its spell. Lila's fingers flew across the keys with a grace that seemed impossible for someone who had been just another server moments ago. For Lila, it was a different world. Every note was a word, every chord a sentence, and the entire performance was a conversation she had never had with anyone before. She felt her nerves melting away, replaced by a pure, exhilarating joy. The restaurant faded into the background. All that mattered was the music and the reaction of the audience, which she could feel vibrating in the air around her. By the time she reached the final notes, the room was completely silent, except for the faint hum of the last lingering chords. Then, slowly, applause erupted. It started as a few hesitant claps from some of the staff, but it grew louder and louder as the patrons joined in, their faces full of astonishment. Some of them were on their feet, eyes wide, unable to believe what they had just heard. The manager approached her, a mixture of relief and disbelief on his face. That was incredible, he said. Lila simply nodded, her hands still hovering over the keys, trying to calm her racing heart. She felt a blush rising to her cheeks, a mixture of pride and embarrassment. She had always known she could play, but hearing the gasps and seeing the wide eyes of those patrons made it real in a way she had never experienced before. One of the older patrons, who had been the loudest skeptic, came forward, his expression softening. I didn't believe someone like you could play like that, he admitted. You've got a real gift. Absolutely remarkable. Lila smiled shyly, feeling a strange warmth inside her. She had been forced into the moment, yes, but now she realized something important. Sometimes the moments we are pushed into are the ones that reveal who we truly are. As the applause continued and the patrons whispered excitedly among themselves, Lila slipped quietly from the piano bench, her hands trembling slightly from the effort. She returned to her apron and tray, but she carried a new confidence inside her, one that could not be shaken by the judgment of others. She had shared her gift even under pressure, and it had been heard. That day, the restaurant felt different to her. The grand piano, once just a piece of furniture, now seemed alive with possibility. She had discovered something about herself, a strength and talent that she could no longer hide. And though her journey had just begun, Lila knew that this was the moment that would change everything. For the first time, the world had seen her, truly seen her, and she had let it hear her heart through music. As she returned to serving tables, she caught glimpses of the patrons who were still talking about her performance, their faces full of admiration. Lila kept her head down, offering polite smiles, but inside, she felt a spark of hope that had been dormant for too long. That spark would grow, and someday, it would carry her far beyond the restaurant, beyond the small life she had known, to places she had only ever dreamed of. For now, though, she allowed herself a quiet moment of satisfaction. She had played, she had been seen, and she had silenced the doubts of those who never believed in her. And that, she thought, was enough to keep her fingers moving and her heart dreaming of the music still waiting to be played. The restaurant had quieted down after the unexpected performance. Lila returned to her duties, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The patrons' eyes followed her as she moved, some smiling, others still in disbelief. She felt a strange mixture of pride and unease. Pride because she had played with all her heart, and unease because she knew this attention might bring more than she could handle. She went to refill water at a nearby table, glancing at the piano again. It sat there silently, almost as if it were waiting for her to return. A part of her wanted to run to it, to play another piece, just to feel the music rush through her veins once more. But another part of her, The cautious part reminded her that this was not her world. She was a waitress, not a performer. "Miss, a word please," the manager called from across the dining room. His tone was different now, less stern, more serious. Lila wiped her hands and approached him, her stomach twisting in nervous anticipation. "You did better than I expected," he said, glancing around to make sure no one was watching them too closely. "The patrons loved it." "But," he hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully, "some of them are influential people. They want to know if you can perform more. They're talking about coming back with a bigger audience." Lila's heart skipped a beat. A bigger audience? More people? Her mind raced with fear and excitement all at once. She wanted to say no, to tell him that she had done enough and that she wanted to go back to her normal life. But the truth was, the idea of playing again, of letting her music be heard, filled her with a longing she could not ignore. I'm not a professional," she said softly, trying to sound calm. "I only play for myself." The manager's expression softened, but there was a hint of urgency in his eyes. "I know that, but some of these patrons are offering opportunities, real opportunities. You have a talent that could take you far, and hiding it here won't do you any good." Lila nodded slowly, trying to absorb his words. She had always dreamed of being recognized for her music, but she had never imagined it could happen like this. Suddenly, in a restaurant, in front of strangers, it was both thrilling and terrifying. As she returned to her table, she noticed one of the patrons from earlier watching her closely. He was an older man, dressed impeccably, with an air of authority that made people listen when he spoke. He raised a hand, signaling her to come over. Lila hesitated but then approached cautiously. "You have a remarkable gift," he said, his voice firm but kind. "I have attended many concerts in my life, and I have never heard someone play with such feeling and precision. You should not let this go to waste. There is more for you than serving tables here." Lila felt a lump form in her throat. She had never been praised like this before. People usually saw her as invisible, just another face in the crowd. But this man saw her. He saw her talent, her dedication, the countless hours she had spent practicing in secret. "Thank you," she whispered, unsure what else to say. He nodded and stepped back, leaving her with a swirl of emotions. She returned to her work, her mind racing with possibilities. Could she really leave this life behind? Could she take the chance that was being offered to her? She had always dreamed of music, but the world outside seemed vast and intimidating. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. Every step, every tray, every smile felt heavy with anticipation. She kept thinking about the piano, about the way her fingers had moved across the keys, and about the expressions on the patrons' faces. For the first time, she felt that her music could change her life. When the restaurant finally began to empty, the manager called her over again. "I need to talk to you before you leave," he said. Lila followed him into the small office at the back. "Listen," he began, leaning against the desk. "Some of the patrons want to host a private event here, and they've asked specifically for you to perform. It's not a public concert, just a few influential people, but it could open doors. You don't have to accept, but I think you should consider it." Lila took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. The thought of performing again filled her with fear, but also a strange excitement. She had never played in front of people who truly appreciated her music, and now she had the chance. I'll do it," she said finally, her voice trembling. "I want to try." The manager's face broke into a small smile. "Good. You won't regret it." That night, Lila went home, her mind racing with what had happened. She couldn't sleep, her fingers itching to play. She sat at her small keyboard in her room and played softly, letting the music flow through her. The notes felt different now, more powerful, more alive. She realized that the performance at the restaurant had changed something inside her. She no longer felt invisible. She no longer felt like just a waitress. The next few days were a whirlwind. The patrons returned, bringing with them invitations and opportunities. Lila performed for them in the restaurant, each time gaining more confidence and control over her music. She began to see herself not just as a server, but as a musician. People started to notice her in ways she had never experienced before. They listened to her, praised her, and even asked about her training. Despite the growing attention, Lila remained humble. She remembered the long nights of practice, the struggles, and the quiet moments when she had been the only one to believe in herself. She didn't want the recognition to change her. She wanted it to be a way to share her music with the world, not to chase fame. One afternoon, as she practiced in the restaurant before a small gathering of patrons, she noticed a young girl watching her from a corner. The girl's eyes were wide with awe, and Lila felt a strange connection. She remembered herself at that age, discovering music in secret, dreaming of a life she didn't know was possible. After finishing a piece, Lila walked over to the girl and smiled. "Do you play?" she asked gently. The girl nodded shyly. "A little," she said. "I wish I could play like you." Lila knelt down to her level. "You can if you practice and never give up. Music is about passion, not talent alone. Keep playing, and you'll see how far it can take you." The girl's face lit up with a smile, and Lila felt a warmth in her chest. She realized that her music was not just about her. It could inspire others, give them hope, and show them that even someone from a small town, a humble background, could achieve something extraordinary. Word of Lila's talent began to spread beyond the restaurant. Some local newspapers picked up the story, and soon, she was being invited to perform at small events and gatherings. Each performance brought new challenges, but also new rewards. She learned to manage her nerves, to read her audience, and to let the music speak for her. Through it all, Lila never forgot the moment she had been forced to play that first time. It had been terrifying, yes, but it had also been the beginning of everything. Sometimes, life pushes us into situations we are not ready for, but those moments can reveal the strength and talent we never knew we had. As the weeks went by, Lila grew more confident, more sure of herself. The restaurant was no longer just a place where she worked. It had become a stage, a testing ground, and a stepping stone to something greater. She realized that the fear she had felt was a sign that she was on the right path. True growth often comes when we are pushed beyond our comfort zone. One evening, after a particularly moving performance, the manager approached her again. "You're amazing," he said quietly. "I've never seen anyone transform like this. You've inspired the patrons, and you've inspired all of us. Don't ever doubt yourself." Lila smiled, feeling a sense of fulfillment she had never known. She knew that the journey ahead would not be easy, but for the first time, she felt ready to face it. Her music was no longer just a secret hidden in the quiet of her room. It was a force that could touch hearts, open doors, and change lives. That night, as she walked home under the soft glow of the streetlights, she thought about all the possibilities ahead. She had been forced to play, yes, but it had led her to a place she could never have imagined. And for the first time, Lila understood that sometimes, the push we fear the most is the one that leads us exactly where we are meant to go. She went to bed that night with a quiet smile on her face, her mind filled with melodies, her heart filled with hope, and a newfound courage that would carry her forward into the unknown, where her music would continue to shine and inspire those who were willing to listen. The days that followed Lila's performance were both thrilling and exhausting. Every time she approached the piano, her heart would race, a mix of anticipation and fear. The patrons had returned, this time in larger numbers, bringing with them people whose faces were unfamiliar, their expressions sharp and judgmental. Lila had learned that the world she had stepped into was not just one of appreciation. It was a world where expectations were high and criticism could be merciless. She stood behind the piano, wiping her hands on her apron, trying to steady herself. The room was filled with well-dressed individuals, some tapping impatiently on their phones, others chatting quietly in low tones. They were important people, critics, investors, influential figures who had seen many performances and thought they had seen it all. And now all eyes were on a waitress. Lila felt the weight of their scrutiny settle on her shoulders. She had played once, and it had been magical, but this was different. They didn't know her, and they had no reason to trust that her music would be anything more than a passing curiosity. Her fingers hovered above the keys, trembling slightly. "Are you sure you can do this?" A voice whispered from behind her. It was the manager, who had become a quiet source of support since that first performance. "Remember, just play from your heart. That's all anyone can ask." She nodded, taking a deep breath. She had to remind herself that she had faced fear before and had come through. She closed her eyes for a moment, thinking of the long hours she had spent practicing alone, the melodies she had learned by heart, and the way music had always been a part of her life. This was not about impressing anyone. It was about sharing what she loved. The room fell silent as she placed her fingers on the keys. At first, the notes came slowly, cautiously, testing the patience of the audience. Some of the critics frowned, clearly expecting hesitation and mistakes. Lila felt the pressure mounting, but she let it wash over her instead of fighting it. She began to play, each note more confident than the last, building a rhythm that demanded attention. She remembered a piece she had composed in secret months ago, a melody that spoke of longing, struggle, and hope. It seemed perfect for this moment. Her fingers danced across the keys, moving with precision and emotion. The music flowed through the room, filling it with a warmth and depth that none of the patrons had expected. Slowly, the skeptical murmurs quieted. The faces that had been lined with doubt softened. A critic, known for his harsh reviews, leaned forward slightly, listening intently. Lila felt her heart beat in rhythm with the music. She was not playing for approval. She was playing because the music needed to be heard, and for the first time she allowed herself to believe that it could touch people beyond herself. The melodies shifted, moving from gentle, hesitant notes to bold, powerful chords that demanded attention. Lila lost herself in the music, forgetting everything but the piano, the sound, and the emotions she was pouring into each note. She could feel the tension in the room transform. The skepticism, the judgment, the high expectations, they all melted away under the weight of her performance. One by one, the patrons leaned in, captivated. The whispers of doubt disappeared, replaced by expressions of awe and wonder. Some eyes glistened with tears, moved by the purity of the music. Lila did not notice them. She was immersed in the flow, in the story she was telling with each chord, each pause, each rise and fall of the melody. By the time she reached the climax of the piece, the room was completely silent, the kind of silence that carries a powerful message. The music had spoken for her, and every listener was forced to acknowledge it. It was no longer just a waitress playing piano. It was a musician, a storyteller, a soul expressing itself through sound. As the final note lingered in the air, Lila opened her eyes and saw the room transformed. The critics, once poised with pens ready to judge, now stared in astonishment. The patrons, some who had doubted her from the start, now clapped, slowly at first, then with increasing enthusiasm, until the applause filled the room. One of the older critics, a man known for his sharp tongue, stepped forward. He had a look of disbelief, but also admiration. "I must admit," he said slowly, "I did not expect this. You have talent, and more than that, you have heart. It is rare to see someone play with such sincerity." Lila's cheeks flushed, but she simply nodded, grateful for the recognition yet still humble. She had learned long ago that music was not about praise, it was about connection. And in that moment, she felt more connected to the people around her than she had ever been. The manager approached her once again, his face a mixture of pride and awe. "You've done it again," he said quietly. "You've silenced them, and not just with skill but with something deeper. They felt it, Lila. They really felt it." She smiled faintly, trying to calm the tremor in her hands. "I just played what I felt," she replied. "I didn't think anyone would notice, but they had noticed. Everyone in the room had noticed." And as she looked around, she realized something profound. She was no longer invisible. She had stepped into a space where her talent demanded recognition, and she had met the challenge. The next few performances became a pattern. Each time, new patrons, new skeptics, new critics would arrive, expecting to find flaws, expecting to dismiss her. And each time, Lila played with the same sincerity and passion, breaking down walls of doubt, one note at a time. It wasn't easy. Some days, she arrived at the piano feeling tired, anxious, unsure if she could rise to the occasion. But each time she touched the keys, she remembered why she loved music, why she had dedicated herself to it in secret for so long. And each time, the audience responded, reminding her that her fear did not define her. One evening, a particularly critical group of patrons arrived. They were well-known figures in the city's music scene, people who had attended countless concerts and performances. Their expressions were guarded, their whispers sharp with judgment. Lila could feel the tension as she approached the piano. Her stomach tightened, and her hands shook slightly. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. This was the moment she had been preparing for, not in public, but in the quiet of her room, through countless hours of practice. She remembered the feeling of freedom she had always experienced when playing, and she let that guide her. The music began softly, almost timidly, and then grew, building in complexity and emotion. The skeptics in the room shifted, their posture changing as they listened. Some frowned, trying to analyze every note, but they could not hide their fascination. Lila's fingers moved effortlessly, her emotions flowing into each chord. The room, once filled with judgment, now held only the power of the music. By the end of the performance, the critics were silent, their expressions unreadable. Then, slowly, one of them began to clap, followed by another, until the room erupted in applause. Lila felt a wave of relief and satisfaction. She had faced doubt, skepticism, and judgment, and her music had triumphed. Afterwards, as she stepped away from the piano, the manager came to her side. "You've done it again, Lila. Every time you rise above the fear, above the judgment. You're proving that talent, when paired with heart, cannot be ignored." Lila nodded, feeling a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. She knew the road ahead would be filled with challenges, with critics and skeptics always ready to test her. But she also knew that she had discovered a strength within herself that could not be shaken. That night, as she walked home through the quiet streets, she thought about the journey she had begun. She had been forced into playing that first time, yes, but it had revealed her true self to the world. And now, every performance, every note she played, was a step toward a future she had only dreamed of. She entered her small apartment and sat at her keyboard, letting her fingers wander over the keys. The melodies she played were no longer just for herself. They were for the people who had listened, for the critics who had doubted, and for the girl she once was, sitting alone, dreaming of a life filled with music. Lila smiled softly. The journey was just beginning, and she knew that whatever challenges awaited her, she would face them with the courage and passion that music had always given her. The piano was no longer a piece of furniture in a restaurant. It was a doorway, a bridge to a world she was only beginning to explore. And as she played, she realized something powerful. The true magic of music was not in the applause or the recognition. It was in the courage to step forward, to share one's heart, and to let the world hear it. No matter what critics said, no matter how skeptical the audience, that courage could never be silenced. The day of the big event had arrived. The restaurant had been transformed for a private gathering, the tables set with fine linen, sparkling glassware, and flickering candles. The patrons who were arriving that evening were people of influence, patrons, investors, music enthusiasts, and even a few journalists. Lila walked in quietly, her apron replaced with a modest dress, and she carried herself with a mix of nervousness and determination. As she approached the piano, her fingers itched with anticipation. She could feel the weight of the room's expectations pressing down on her. This was no ordinary performance. These were people who had seen the best musicians, people who were not easily impressed. And yet, she knew that if she played from her heart, nothing could stop her. The manager gave her a reassuring nod. "Just you and the piano," he said softly. "Play like it's the only thing that matters. You've done it before. You can do it again." Lila nodded, taking a deep breath. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the quiet of the room settle around her. She remembered the countless hours she had spent practicing, the nights when the only audience had been the shadows on her walls, and the joy she had felt in creating music just for herself. That feeling, she realized, was stronger than fear, stronger than doubt. The guests had begun to settle in, their chatter fading as the first notes filled the room. Lila started with a soft melody, gentle and deliberate, her fingers moving over the keys with care. The sound was delicate, almost fragile, but it carried a quiet confidence. People leaned in, listening closely. Some frowned slightly, still unsure what to expect. But there was something in the music that drew them in, a subtle honesty that could not be ignored. As she continued, the melody grew, weaving together notes of joy, sorrow, and longing. Lila's fingers moved with a fluidity that seemed effortless, her heart guiding every chord. The room seemed to hold its breath. Conversations had stopped completely. Even the clinking of glasses and silverware had faded into silence. The music was alive, speaking to each person in its own way, touching memories, stirring emotions, and commanding attention. She had chosen this piece carefully. It was one she had composed in secret, a reflection of her life, its struggles, its quiet moments of triumph, and the dreams she had kept hidden. She let herself sink into it, losing all awareness of the audience. All that mattered was the story the music was telling, the journey from hesitation to confidence, from doubt to courage. As the tempo increased, the energy in the room shifted. Lila's fingers danced across the keys with increasing speed and precision. The music grew bolder, more complex, yet never lost its emotional core. Some of the guests leaned forward, eyes wide with surprise and admiration. Whispers of astonishment spread quietly through the audience, but no one dared interrupt the flow of the performance. For Lila, the music was a living thing, flowing through her, demanding everything she had to give. She could feel the audience reacting, even without looking at them. The tension, the skepticism, the doubts. They were all melting away under the force of her passion. She realized in that moment that this was what it meant to truly perform. Not for praise, not for approval, but for the pure connection between her and the listeners. The climax of the piece approached, and Lila's heart raced. She had practiced this section countless times, but tonight it felt different. It felt alive, unpredictable, full of emotion. She let go completely, her hands moving faster, yet with perfect control, creating a wave of sound that filled the room. The music soared, powerful and full, yet intimate and personal. Every note seemed to reach directly into the hearts of those listening. The audience was captivated. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Others sat motionless, completely focused, their expressions a mixture of awe and disbelief. The skeptics from earlier performances had no words, only stunned silence. Lila could sense the impact of every note, the way it touched each person differently, yet united them in shared emotion. As the final chords approached, Lila slowed, letting the last notes linger in the air, soft and haunting. The silence that followed was almost unbearable, a quiet pause that held the weight of the entire room. Then, as the final note faded, the room erupted into applause. It started quietly, almost hesitantly, but quickly grew into a powerful wave of appreciation, cheering, and whistles. People were on their feet, clapping, some with tears in their eyes, others with expressions of pure astonishment. Lila's chest heaved as she let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. She had done it. She had faced the highest expectations, the most critical eyes, and she had not just survived. She had triumphed. Her music had spoken louder than words, louder than doubts, louder than fear. The manager approached her once more, his face glowing with pride. Lila, that was extraordinary. You've done more than impress them, you've moved them. You've shown them the true power of talent and passion. She smiled, her hands still hovering above the keys. I just played what I felt, she said softly. That's all I can do. One of the patrons, an older woman known for her influence in the city's music circles, stepped forward. I have attended countless concerts and performances, she said, her voice trembling slightly. But I have never witnessed anything like that. You are not just talented, you are a true artist. You must share this gift with the world." Lila felt a lump in her throat. She had never been praised like this before, and yet it felt natural. She realized that she had been ready for this all along. Even if she didn't know it, the music had always been inside her. Tonight, she had simply let it speak. As the evening continued, Lila received invitations to perform at other events. Opportunities she had only dreamed of in the quiet of her small room. People approached her, expressing admiration, curiosity, and respect. Each conversation was a reminder that her life was beginning to change in ways she could never have imagined. Despite the praise and attention, Lila remained humble. She remembered the long nights of practice, the moments of doubt and fear, and the quiet determination that had carried her this far. She understood that talent alone was not enough. It was the courage to share it, to face fear and judgment, that truly defined an artist. After the event ended, she returned home, exhausted but exhilarated. She sat at her small keyboard and played softly, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. Every note she played felt different now, charged with the knowledge that her music had the power to touch lives, to inspire, and to change perspectives. Lila thought about the skeptics she had faced, the doubts she had carried, and the fear that had once paralyzed her. She realized that those challenges had not been obstacles. They had been tests, shaping her into the musician she had become. The forced performance at the restaurant, the initial skepticism, the critical eyes, they had all led her to this breakthrough, this moment of clarity and triumph. She smiled to herself, knowing that the journey was far from over. There would be more challenges, more critics, and more moments of fear. But now, she had proof that she could rise above them, that she could let her music speak louder than any doubt or expectation. As she played into the quiet night, Lila felt a sense of peace and fulfillment she had never known. She had found her voice, her purpose, and her courage. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a bridge to a world she had only begun to explore, a world where her music could inspire, heal, and transform. And in that moment, she understood something vital. True greatness does not come from comfort or ease. It comes from facing fear, embracing opportunity, and letting one's passion shine, no matter the stakes. Lila had been forced to play once, but now she played by choice, and that choice had opened doors she had never imagined. The night ended with applause still echoing in her mind, the faces of the audience etched in her memory. Lila went to bed with a quiet smile, knowing that she had taken a significant step toward the life she had always dreamed of. Music was no longer just a secret passion. It was her path, her voice, and her future. She closed her eyes, letting the melodies linger in her mind, and drifted into sleep with a heart full of hope, courage, and the certainty that her journey had only just begun. The world had heard her, and she knew it would never be the same again. The days after Lila's breakthrough performance were unlike anything she had ever experienced. The restaurant, which had always been a place of routine and repetition, suddenly became a center of attention. People came not just to eat, but to see the waitress who had stunned everyone with her music. Some were curious, some skeptical, but all were intrigued. Lila tried to move through the restaurant as usual, but it was impossible. Whispers followed her, and patrons looked at her with a mixture of respect and astonishment. For the first time in her life, she felt visible, not as a waitress, but as someone who had a talent that demanded attention. Her hands trembled slightly as she carried trays of food, but it was no longer just fear. It was excitement, anticipation, and a quiet pride. The manager approached her one afternoon, his expression serious but supportive. "Lila, some important people want to meet you," he said. "They've heard about your performance and want to talk about opportunities. You don't have to do anything you're not ready for, but—" He paused, letting the words sink in. This could be life-changing. Lila swallowed hard, her mind racing. She had dreamed of being recognized, of sharing her music beyond her small apartment. But this was real. It was no longer a fantasy. She nodded slowly, trying to steady her nerves. I'll do it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. That evening, she found herself in a quiet room, far removed from the busy dining area. The people she had been invited to meet were seated comfortably, their expressions curious but respectful. They were wealthy, influential, and well-connected, each with a reputation for being critical and hard to impress. Lila felt a wave of nervousness wash over her. She had faced skeptics before, but something about this gathering made her palms sweat. One of the patrons, a woman with a commanding presence, leaned forward. "We've heard about your performance at the restaurant," she said. "Your music has touched people. We want to know more about you. Who taught you? Where did you learn?" Lila shook her head slightly, her voice soft but firm. "I've always played in secret," she admitted. "I never studied formally. I just practiced on my own every day, for as long as I can remember." The group exchanged glances, clearly impressed. One of the men, a well-known music enthusiast, smiled. "You're remarkable," he said. "Most people with your skill have had years of formal training. The fact that you've developed this on your own is extraordinary." Lila felt a mixture of pride and disbelief. She had always known she was talented, but hearing it confirmed by people who had seen the best musicians in the world was overwhelming. She realized that her dedication, her long hours of practice, and her love for music had finally been acknowledged in a way that mattered. The conversation continued, moving from casual compliments to serious discussions about opportunities. They spoke of private performances, collaborations, and even invitations to music schools and concerts. Lila listened, her heart pounding. She had never imagined that her quiet life could be touched by such possibilities. When the meeting ended, she walked home slowly, trying to process everything that had happened. The city streets were quiet in the evening, and the lights reflected softly off the pavement. Lila felt a sense of awe and gratitude. Her life was changing, and she was beginning to understand that her talent was more than a hobby. It was her future. Over the next few weeks, Lila's schedule became filled with performances. She played at private events, charity gatherings, and small music clubs. Each time, she brought the same passion and emotion to her music, and each time, she earned admiration and respect. People who had once doubted her skill now sought her out, eager to hear her play. Despite the growing attention, Lila remained humble. She never forgot the long hours she had spent alone, the nights when her only audience had been the shadows on her walls. She understood that recognition was not the goal. Sharing her music, touching lives, and expressing herself was what truly mattered. One evening, after a particularly moving performance, a journalist approached her. "Your story is incredible," he said. "A waitress with no formal training, playing at a level that could rival professionals. People are going to want to know more about you. Are you ready for that?" Lila paused, considering her response. She had always been shy, hesitant to share her story with the world. But she realized that her journey could inspire others, just as music had inspired her. "Yes," she said finally. "I want people to know that passion and dedication can take you far, even if you start from a place that others overlook." The journalist smiled, nodding. "Then your story will be shared. People need to hear it." Word of Lila's talent spread quickly. Soon, she was invited to perform at larger events, gaining a reputation as a prodigy who had emerged from humble beginnings. She received letters of appreciation, invitations to music workshops, and offers to collaborate with professional musicians. Her life, once ordinary and predictable, was now filled with possibilities she had only dreamed of. Yet, even as the recognition grew, Lila never lost sight of what truly mattered. She continued to practice diligently, honing her skills and exploring new melodies. She took each performance seriously, understanding that every note she played had the power to connect with someone, to touch their heart, or to inspire them. One afternoon, while preparing for a private concert, Lila received a call from a music academy. They had heard about her unique talent and wanted to offer her a scholarship. She could study formally, learn advanced techniques, and refine her compositions under professional guidance. It was an opportunity that many musicians would dream of for years. Lila felt a surge of excitement and gratitude. She knew this was a chance to grow, to take her music to new heights. But she also felt a pang of nervousness. Formal training would be demanding, and she was used to playing on her own terms. She took a deep breath, reminding herself of all she had already overcome. The skepticism, the fear, the pressure of performing in front of critical audiences. "I'll do it," she said softly, more to herself than to anyone else. "I want to learn, to grow, to share my music with the world." The scholarship opened new doors. Lila began attending classes, learning about composition, theory, and performance techniques. She met other musicians, shared ideas, and discovered new ways to express her emotions through music. Each day brought challenges, but also immense satisfaction. She realized that her journey was no longer about proving herself to others. It was about becoming the musician she had always dreamed of being. Her performances continued to captivate audiences. Each time she played, she poured her heart into the music, letting every note reflect her experiences, her struggles, and her dreams. People came from far and wide to hear her, drawn not only by her technical skill but by the emotion and honesty that radiated from her playing. One evening, after a particularly emotional performance, Lila sat quietly at the piano, letting the last notes fade. The room was filled with applause, cheers, and admiration. She looked around at the faces of the audience, some teary-eyed, some smiling, all moved by her music, and felt a profound sense of fulfillment. It was in moments like these that Lila understood the true power of her talent. Music was not just about skill or recognition, it was about connection, about touching hearts and inspiring others. She had begun her journey as a waitress, uncertain and overlooked, but her dedication, passion, and courage had carried her to a place where her music could make a difference. As she walked home that night, the city lights reflecting softly on the pavement, Lila felt a quiet confidence. She had faced fear, skepticism, and doubt, and had emerged stronger, more determined, and more capable than ever. The world had seen her talent, but more importantly, she had seen it too, and she had embraced it fully. Lila knew that her journey was far from over. There would be new challenges, new audiences, and new opportunities to prove herself. But she also knew that she had discovered something enduring: the power of music, the strength of her own voice, and the courage to follow her dreams, no matter how improbable they might seem. She reached her small apartment and sat at her keyboard, playing softly as she reflected on the path that had brought her here. Every note was a reminder of how far she had come. From a nervous waitress forced to play in a restaurant to a recognized musician with a future full of possibilities. And in that quiet moment, Lila understood something important. Talent alone is not enough. It takes courage to share it, determination to nurture it, and the willingness to step into the unknown. She had done all of these things, and in return, the world had opened its doors to her, ready to hear the music she had always carried in her heart. As she played into the night, Lila felt a sense of peace and purpose she had never known. The applause, the recognition, and the opportunities were wonderful, but they were only part of the journey. The true reward was the music itself, the ability to create, to connect, and to inspire. And with that thought, Lila smiled, her fingers moving gently over the keys, ready to face whatever challenges and triumphs awaited her next. She had found her voice, her passion, and her place in the world, and nothing could take that away. Months had passed since Lila's first performance at the restaurant. What had once been a quiet, ordinary life was now filled with music, opportunity, and recognition. The waitress who had once been overlooked was now known for her extraordinary talent, and people traveled from far and wide to hear her play. Yet, despite all the attention, Lila remained grounded. She remembered where she had started, the long nights of practice, the secret melodies she had played alone, and the moment she had been forced to perform for the first time. One evening, she arrived at a grand hall for a special event. The room was larger than any space she had ever played in, with a polished wooden floor, crystal chandeliers, and a stage that gleamed under the bright lights. The audience consisted of people she had only heard about before: music critics, concert organizers, and influential figures from around the country. Some were known for being hard to impress, yet they had all come to see her play. Lila felt the familiar flutter of nerves, but it was different this time. This was no longer fear. It was anticipation, excitement, and a quiet confidence that had grown from months of practice, performance, and experience. She walked to the piano, her fingers itching to touch the keys, and took a deep breath. As she seated herself, she looked out at the audience. They were waiting, expectant, curious, and ready to judge. But she no longer felt the weight of their judgment in the same way. She knew her ability, and more importantly, she knew her heart. Music had always been a part of her. It was her voice, her passion, her story. The room fell silent as she began to play. The first notes were soft, delicate, carrying a sense of calm and intimacy. It was a contrast to the grandeur of the hall, a reminder that music was not just about spectacle, it was about connection. Lila let her fingers move naturally, letting the melody flow through her as she had so many times before, but this time with a confidence that came from knowing she belonged on this stage. The piece she played was one she had composed herself, a reflection of her journey, the struggles, the triumphs, and the quiet moments of determination that had brought her here. As the music filled the room, she could see faces softening, expressions of awe and wonder spreading across the audience. People leaned forward, captivated, as if the notes themselves were speaking directly to their hearts. Lila's performance built slowly, each movement of her fingers more expressive than the last. She played with precision, yes, but also with raw emotion, letting the story of her life unfold in sound. The skeptics who had doubted her talent months ago were now silent, unable to deny the skill, passion, and soul in her music. As the piece reached its climax, the energy in the hall was electric. The music was powerful, yet intimate, commanding attention while inviting the audience to experience it personally. Lila lost herself completely in the flow of the performance, no longer aware of the lights, the stage, or the people. There was only the music and the connection it created. The final notes rang out, soft and lingering, holding the room in a suspended moment of awe. Then, gradually, applause began to swell. At first, it was quiet, hesitant, but soon it grew into a thunderous wave of appreciation, cheers, and admiration. People were on their feet, some with tears in their eyes, others smiling in astonishment. Lila felt a rush of emotion, a mixture of relief, pride, and joy. She had done it. She had shared her heart through music, and it had been heard, truly heard. After the performance, people approached her, praising her talent, asking about her story, and expressing gratitude for the emotions she had evoked. One of the music critics, who had been notoriously harsh in the past, shook his head in disbelief. "You are extraordinary," he said, "not just for your skill, but for the depth, the honesty, and the courage in your performance. You remind us all why we love music." Lila smiled, humbled by the words. She had never played for recognition, but it was impossible not to feel the warmth and validation of being seen in this way. She remembered the first time she had been forced to play in the restaurant. The fear, the hesitation, the doubt. And now, she realized that those moments had been the beginning of a journey that had led her here, to this stage, to this audience, and to this sense of fulfillment. In the weeks that followed, Lila's life continued to change. Invitations poured in for concerts, collaborations, and even opportunities to compose for larger productions. She began to travel, performing in cities she had only dreamed of visiting. With each performance, her confidence grew, and so did her connection with her audience. People began to recognize her not just as a musician, but as an inspiration, someone who had transformed her life through courage, passion, and dedication. Despite the busy schedule, Lila never lost sight of her roots. She continued to play with the same sincerity and humility that had defined her from the beginning. Every note was personal, every melody a reflection of her journey. She understood that her success was not just about talent. It was about heart, determination, and the willingness to step into the unknown. One afternoon, while preparing for a performance at a prestigious music festival, Lila received a letter from a young girl who had attended one of her early performances at the restaurant. The letter was filled with gratitude and inspiration, describing how Lila's music had encouraged her to pursue her own dreams, despite the challenges she faced. Lila read the letter with tears in her eyes, realizing that her journey had touched more than just her own life. Her music had the power to inspire others, to give hope, and to show that talent and passion could overcome any obstacle. She understood that her story was not just about her. It was about everyone who had ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or uncertain of their own abilities. The festival performance was one of the most important of her career. The hall was filled with hundreds of people, each expecting a high level of skill and artistry. Lila approached the piano with a calm determination, her fingers poised to play. As the first notes filled the room, she felt a deep sense of purpose. This was more than a performance. It was a culmination of everything she had worked for, a testament to her journey, and a gift to those who were willing to listen. The audience was mesmerized. Lila's music carried them through emotions of joy, sorrow, hope, and triumph. Each note resonated with honesty. Each chord spoke of her experiences, and each melody connected deeply with the hearts of the listeners. By the end of the performance, the hall erupted into applause, standing ovations, and cheers. Lila felt a wave of emotion, knowing that she had shared something meaningful, something lasting. After the performance, she was approached by musicians, critics, and organizers, all praising her talent and dedication. They offered opportunities to collaborate, to perform internationally, and to record her compositions. Lila realized that her life had transformed completely, from a young waitress unsure of her place in the world, to a musician whose talent, courage, and heart had opened doors she had never imagined. Despite the accolades and recognition, Lila remained humble. She continued to practice daily, exploring new melodies, refining her technique, and finding new ways to express herself through music. She understood that her journey was ongoing, that there was always more to learn, and that her connection with her audience was the true reward. One evening, after returning from a particularly successful tour, Lila sat at her piano in the quiet of her apartment. She played softly, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. Every note reminded her of the first time she had been forced to play in the restaurant. The fear, the uncertainty, and the unexpected path that had led to discovery, growth, and triumph. She realized that life had a way of pushing people into moments they are not ready for, moments that test their courage and reveal their true potential. Her first forced performance had been terrifying, yes, but it had also been the catalyst that transformed her life. It had shown her what she was capable of and given her the courage to embrace her talent fully. As she played, Lila thought about the countless others who might feel overlooked or underestimated. She understood that her story, her journey, and her music could inspire them, showing that with passion, dedication, and courage, anything was possible. She smiled, knowing that her journey was not just her own. It was a story that could touch lives, ignite dreams, and encourage others to step into their own potential. The applause, the recognition, and the opportunities were wonderful, but Lila knew that the true reward was the music itself. The ability to create, to express, and to connect with others in a way that transcended words. Her journey had been long and challenging, but it had led her to a place of fulfillment, purpose, and joy. And in that quiet moment, as her fingers moved gently over the keys, Lila felt a sense of peace and accomplishment. She had found her voice, her path, and her courage. The world had seen her talent, but more importantly, she had believed in herself, embraced her passion, and shared it with the world. The journey that began with fear and uncertainty had led to triumph and transformation. Lila, once a simple waitress forced to play a piano, had become a musician whose talent, dedication, and heart could touch lives, inspire dreams, and leave a lasting impact. As the final note lingered in the quiet of her room, Lila smiled. She knew that her journey was far from over, that there were still new melodies to discover, new audiences to touch, and new challenges to face. But she also knew that she had everything she needed: the courage to face the unknown, the passion to create, and the heart to share her music with the world. And with that thought, she played on, letting the music carry her forward into a future filled with possibility, hope, and endless melodies waiting to be heard.